Welcome back to the Movie Man. Today I will show you a 2002 American post-apocalyptic science fiction, romance, and thriller film, The Time Machine. Spoilers ahead. Watch out, and take care. The movie begins in the year 1899. Dr. Alexander Hartigan teaches mechanics and engineering at Columbia University. While deep in thought, his friend David Philby reminds him he is almost late for an engagement with a certain young lady. Alexander had almost forgotten, and they rushed home to Alexander. On their way, Alexander shares that the dean rejected his proposal of utilizing solar power, and David says his ideas are too radical. Alexander comments he wants his students to dream of what could be, and not be content and conservative like everybody else. He tells David to look around and observe how everyone has identical black bowler hats, saying he'd like to see people throw them away and question things. Once at home, they meet Mrs. Watchett, who's Alexander's housekeeper and assistant. She tells Alexander to go and change clothes that are not filled with chalk. David checks Alexander's crazy inventions, like an electric toothbrush, and a city plan for the future, all while telling Alexander he shouldn't waste time on that German crackpot Mr. Einstein. Alexander responds that Mr. Einstein has some very interesting ideas and that he will give him all the support he can give. Soon after, Alexander hastily leaves to meet the lady. About to enter a park, a woman asks if he wants to buy flowers, and Alexander recollects he promised to bring flowers with him. But he is immediately distracted by a spectacular machine, a horseless carriage. The driver accidentally starts it, and Alexander luckily grabs the brake and stops it immediately. The driver is thankful and offers Alexander a ride. Even though he wants to accept, Alexander has something that is more important to him and continues into the park. He arrives at an ice skating rink, where the woman he is going to meet calls his name. Her name is Emma, and she mentions he is late. Alexander says he came as soon as he could. She asks for her flowers, and Alexander says he forgot and is sorry, explaining he got distracted. He asks her to take a stroll in the park, and she accepts. She notices he is shivering and asks if everything is well. He answers that things are not so good without her in his life. She gets happy, and he says they are meant to be together and asks her to marry him. He picks up a ring with a moonstone, and she gets overjoyed since it is her birthstone, saying she loves it. Seconds after, a man appears from the bushes, taking out a gun, and demanding their wallet and jewelry. As the man tries to take the ring, Alexander starts fighting him and the gun accidentally goes off, causing a bullet to hit Emma. As Alexander embraces her, she bleeds out in his arms. 4 years later, Alexander is deep into his work when David visits, saying he is concerned about him. Alexander says he knows, but that he needs David to go. David says he won't leave him hiding like this and asks what he is working on. Alexander stops him when he goes to see what's behind the curtains and asks him to come by for dinner in a week and he will show him. David says okay, and says he will see him in a week. But as he leaves, Alexander says quietly to himself that, in a week, they will never even have had this conversation. Next, Alexander is seen having cleaned himself up, taking his favorite pocket watch that was a gift from Emma, and then going to a machine he built. He sits down in it and inserts a lever that starts the machine. As he drags the lever towards him, time starts to accelerate in reverse. Again, Alexander is at the ice skating rink, but this time Emma tells him he is early. She asks for her flowers, but Alexander instead kisses her, which she enjoys. He tells her they should go to the city, and the two take a carriage to Bleecker Street. As they are walking later, Emma notices the horseless carriage and tells Alexander to look, but Alexander ignores it, saying it's just a machine. Emma immediately understands something is not as usual and asks if something is wrong since he never ignores spectacular inventions. But Alexander assures her everything is okay, telling her she should go home and wait for him, saying he will come back later, but will seem confused why they didn't meet at the skating rink. She doesn't understand and is confused, but trusts him and says okay. However, before leaving, she asks to get her flowers that he promised, and Alexander goes to buy them. But suddenly, the horseless carriage starts involuntarily and frightens some horses on a horse-drawn carriage, and what shouldn't happen, happens. Once again, Emma is killed in front of Alexander. Sometime later, Alexander talks to David, saying this was not supposed to happen since they were out of the park. As Alexander says he could come back 1,000 times and see her die 1,000 ways, David gets confused. Alexander says to himself he can't get the answers at this point. Next, Alexander is back in the time machine at his home, starting it up, pushing the lever forward, and seeing time speeding up. A day becomes equivalent to an hour, a month can then be seen in a minute, and eventually, a full year passes in just seconds. His home disappears and becomes a garage. Fashion changes every instant. The city skyline transforms. New technology is used. And suddenly he arrives in the year 2030. He stops the time machine, steps out, and somewhat hesitantly inspects his surroundings. Finally, he decides to go through the city to the New York Public Library. Once there, he sees a holographic librarian who introduces himself as Vox 114, and Alexander finds the technology very strange. Vox says he is linked to every database on Earth and asks him what he wants to know. Alexander asks why one can't change the past, and the librarian immediately accesses the science fiction library. But Alexander insists he accesses real scientific literature, after which Vox provides the answer that you can't change it because time travel is not possible. Alexander then thinks out loud he must go further into the future to get his question answered, and leaves. He starts going forward in time, but he feels a tremble and immediately stops, ending up in the year 2037. He sees that everything is destroyed, and soon after a military vehicle appears. Soldiers get out and arrest him, saying they must evacuate since the moon is breaking up. At that same second, the Earth's crust starts cracking, and Alexander manages to get back to the time machine. But a powerful earthquake knocks him unconscious just as he starts it. Time begins to accelerate very fast, and outside, thousands of years pass every second. Trees grow, canyons are formed, and even ice ages come and go before Alexander wakes up. He stops the machine and ends up on Earth 800,000 years later. Next, Alexander is seen sleeping somewhere, dreaming of Emma, and being cared for by a woman. He wakes up one day, unaware of where he is, and puts on his clothes. As he does, he sees a boy who starts running away. As he follows the kid, he suddenly stops at a breathtaking view of a canyon village. Like and subscribe may look simple for you, but for us, it's very valuable. Please like, subscribe, and press the bell icon for the latest notifications. Thank you for your support. The kid yells something he doesn't understand, and suddenly people appear from all directions. They all speak an unknown language he's never heard. However, one woman says she knows the stone language and understands him. They begin to speak but are quickly interrupted by a loud sound, and all the people disperse. In the evening, Alexander talks to the woman, whose name is Mara, and her little brother Kalen. Alexander explains to the curious kid that he comes from a very busy place, where everyone walks around in black hats on their heads, and gives Kalen his pocket watch. When Kalen has gone to sleep, Mara explains to him that their parents have gone from this place, and Alexander says he's sorry to hear that. As he sees the moon, he says to himself that David was right, he did go too far. A while later, he reveals he's from another time, and due to everything being weird about him, Mara believes him. That night, Alexander wakes up from a bad dream in which a metallic head yells his name. Kalen also awakens from the dream, and Mara explains to him that everybody has it, which Alexander finds strange. The next day, Mara shows Alexander a collection of stones, having words from the stone language on them. Later that day, Alexander asks her where all the older people are, and she answers they have all gone to another place. He asks if she means they are dead, but she enigmatically replies that some things are better left unsaid. She explains they don't dwell on the past, and remember their parents by making these big wind turbines. The two go on shore, and Mari leads him to the time machine. He examines it and sees it seems to be fine. She then asks him if he can take Kalen with him if it works, and Alexander asks why but doesn't get a clear answer from her. Suddenly, strange sounds are heard and Mara starts running, yelling they must get to Kalen. As they get back, Alexander sees people panic. Strange creatures appear shooting darts, and Mara is hit. Alexander removes the dart from her shoulder, realizing it has a very smelly substance on it. Creatures surface from the ground and start hunting people who have been hit by the darts, taking them back with him into the ground. Alexander sees that Kalen has been hit and that a creature has started chasing him. He runs to him and hits the creature to save him, and it starts chasing Alexander instead. As it catches up on him, Alexander dodges its attempt to attack him. He starts climbing up on a wind turbine, but the creature climbs after and grabs him, and the two fall to the ground. The creature grabs him around his neck and starts to suffocate him, but from nowhere Kalen appears with a torch, saving Alexander. But at that same instant, Mara is heard screaming, and the creature runs back into the woods, managing to take her instead with it down into the sand. Alexander is devastated and tries to dig in the sand to no avail. He asks the people from the village why they don't fight back. He receives the answer that those who fight back are taken first. He then asks Kalen where people are taken, who tells him no one knows, but that there is a cave close by with ghosts that might help him. That night, Kalen leads Alexander to a cave, in which Alexander sees a very familiar object. Suddenly Vox 114 is heard, and Alexander tells Kalen it's nothing to worry about. Vox says he remembers everyone he ever talked with, and Alexander asks what has happened since he saw him last. Vox says that what was once one race, is now two, one living below ground, and the other above. Alexander asks where people are taken by the race below, and Vox says he once had a friend who managed to escape, coming from the jungle in the east. If they just follow the breathing, they will find it. Next, they arrive at the skull in their dreams. Alexander tells Kalen to go back to the village, and Kalen reveals before he leaves that he lost the pocket watch in the attack and that the creatures took it. Alexander rhetorically asks why they would take it. Moments later, Alexander enters the skull, walks into underground caves, and eventually arrives in a large hollow space with creatures. He finds a room with clothes in it and sees a necklace Mara wore. But as he sees knives and nasty tools, he gets shocked, trips, and falls into a place with skeletons floating around in the water. Soon after, a creature grabs him, and he is forced to go down into an enclosed area. Once down, he finds Mara in a cage, but she seems to be unresponsive. As Alexander turns around, he sees a strange pale man. The pale man, whose name is Morlock, starts telling a story of how one race became two. A long time ago, after the moon fell from the sky, Earth could no longer sustain the species. Some managed to stay above, but the rest escaped underground. Centuries later, when life on Earth recovered, they could no longer re-emerge into the sun. So they bred themselves into castes underground, where some got good eyes and ears, and others got big muscles. Morlock explains he belongs to a caste that expanded their cerebral abilities and can see and control others' thoughts, even Alexander's. He tells Alexander that he controls the underground people so that they don't overconsume and exhaust the food supply. Alexander asks subset of humans' role here is to be food, to which Morlock answers yes, except those who are suitable to be breeding vessels, like Mara. Alexander gets angry and says it's a corruption of every natural law, and Morlock responds irritated that his time travel is likewise a corruption of natural laws. Morlock creates a mental image in Alexander's head, showing his watch collection, his inventions, and his dream of Emma and of what could have been. Morlock then explains to Alexander that he built the time machine because Emma died. If she had lived, it would have never existed, and so he can't use the time machine to go back and save her. He is in other words the inescapable result of the tragedy. Morlock brings forth his time machine and says that, now that he has his answer, he should go back home. Alexander asks to get his pocket watch back, but as Morlock gives it to him, Alexander grabs Morlock, starts the machine, and the two start fighting in it. Eventually, Morlock falls out of the machine, hanging from Alexander's throat, and dies due to time passing tremendously fast outside. As Alexander stops the machine far into the future, he sees the underground race having destroyed all life on the surface. Next, Alexander goes back in time to Mara and saves her. He starts the machine, locking it in place with his pocket watch, and the two run past the creatures who are no longer controlled by Morlock. Alexander manages to trap them, and the two continue towards the exit. Moments later, Alexander is hit by a dart and marked by its smell, and creatures start following them through the caves. While climbing, almost at the surface, The pocket watch breaks and the time machine explodes and emits a time wave through the underground tunnels. Everything in its way instantly dies or disappears. The duo manages to get out in the nick of time, saved by the village people. From afar, the group sees how the time wave spreads through the underground tunnels, killing all creatures. Mara says she is sorry for his machine, and Alexander says it's alright, since it was just a machine, and the two hold hands. In the final scenes, Vox is seen telling children stories from his large database of historical books. Alexander is seen showing Mara and Kaylin where his house once was, and describing what his home looked like inside. At another time, Mrs. Watchett is seen telling David that Alexander has been gone for a week. David remarks he is glad Alexander is gone, hopefully having found a new home. David then asks if Mrs. Watchett wants to work for him and his wife, at least till Alexander returns, and she happily accepts. As Mrs. Watchett is about to leave Alexander's room, she says, "Godspeed." And finally, in the window to the street outside, David is seen taking a final glance at Alexander's house, taking off, and then throwing away his black bowler hat, just like Alexander would have wanted. That was all of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.